The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS.
Now, BRICS is an acronym for the 5 major emerging global economies, namely Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
International reserve currency planned by Russia and China. Now, the announcement of a reserve currency was made by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The Saudis are cutting oil production as part of OPEC's decision to reduce.
Senate Democrats urging President Biden to end cooperation with Saudi Arabia.
President Biden vowing to punish Saudi Arabia.
Even old friends of the West are ditching it, like Saudi Arabia. And now it wants to be a part of BRICS.
All they have to do is say, we're turning off the pipes, we'll turn them back on, but guess what? You have to pay us in gold.
You see massive accumulation of gold and silver off of exchanges like COMEX, where nations like BRICS and other big institutions are actually taking possession of their gold. What does all this gold accumulation mean, especially in the context of this great reset thing from Davos, aka the W.E.F, World Economic Forum, that's propagating? How does the petrodollar blow up by BRICS? And what will BRICS replace the petrodollar power vacuum with? And it's not what people think. You've reached the Financial Almanac. I'm Basil. And how do you get a great reset? First, we saw that the investment markets reached an all-time high for asset prices at the lowest interest rates we've ever seen in human history. After that, the Ukraine-Russian war started, right? And Russia was shot with sanctions. It turns out that this incentivized the whole world to find a back door for trade, since the world just watched what happened to the Russians. 85% of the world is saying, well, you know what, Russians, you're still okay to trade with, because it seems like most of the world doesn't actually like the way the West was handling things. So they're all coalescing for trade, right? 150 countries on the Belt and Road Initiative that's led by China.
The new Silk Road is an undertaking of colossal proportions. It includes 2 railway routes crossing Asia and then Europe, one via Russia, Belarus, and Poland, and another further south taking in Central Asia, Iran, and Turkey. There's also a sea link between China and the Mediterranean via the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal, and new air freight routes, all designed to increase trade volume between China and Europe.
All of these countries in the Belt and Road Project and in the BRICS nations would amount to 90% of the human population on the planet. All of these countries, one-on-one, can't stand up to the US alone. But when you put them all together, then they will dominate the US. Why do big players purchase and take possession of their own gold? Well, gold is classified as the only tier 1 asset in the world next to the US dollars, as things stand today. Remember that the big money around the world, the central banks, the commercial banks, the sovereign wealth funds, the family offices, they're all buying gold. They're all taking it off of exchanges, and they're moving their counterparty risks from exchanges to their own possession. And you can too, by safely storing it in your own house too. You can see the withdrawal from all of the major exchanges and then moving it to physical bullion and bar possession. How does all of this blow up? Simple.
President Biden says there will be consequences for Saudi Arabia after the kingdom sided with other oil-producing countries to significantly cut production.
President Biden threatens consequences for Saudi Arabia after they decided to cut global oil production. This includes Saudi Arabia's OPEC allies.
The American president was spotted fist-bumping with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And now he's promising to punish the kingdom.
Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS nations, and Saudi Arabia says, hey US, thank you. It's been hell of a ride. We had some fun together, right? But looky here, we're looking for a more open relationship now, and we're gonna be working with China and Russia, not just economically, but also defensively as well. In fact, we struck a joint military cooperation agreement the day you pulled out of Afghanistan in that blunder of yours. You know what? It's in our best interest, and all of OPEC as well, who are also on the Belt and Road Initiative, that we're going to open up energy purchases in other currencies, including the yuan, the rupee, the ruble, euro, gold, and of course, you the dollar.
Our house is your house. There's an Arab saying, the sands are blowing. And I submit to you, King Fahd, that if the sands of time give us any hint of the future, it is that in the days ahead, the friendship between the Saudi Arabian and American people will be a strong and vital force in the world.
That's if you're still interested in being with us in this open relationship. And like that, it's over.
The dollar is facing a revolt.
The US dollar was no longer a reliable store of value. Suddenly, it was a political weapon that could be wielded at will against anyone who held it.
That the United States sort of pushed Saudi Arabia towards Russia by snubbing Saudi Arabia.
Every country on the planet who has had to own dollars since the 70s will dump them, because with this new open relationship, aka multipolar commercial world, everyone will start dumping dollars since they can trade without having to buy dollars first. What happens when those dollarized US Treasury bonds, indebted instruments that have been the reserve asset for the world, starts hitting US shores? The dollar collapses, the value weakens, and the purchasing power collapses if many people do it around the world at the same time.
Well, all those dollars will come home, and the value of our currency will plummet even further. And that will lead to poverty across the United States.
This would usher in hyperinflation, an unprecedented moment for the United States and the rest of the West. What happens next as an adverse reaction to hyperinflation? Interest rates will have to spike to increase the demand for the dollar. The private institution known as the Federal Reserve will have to have higher interest rates to compensate for the loss of purchasing power of the dollar. When everyone dumps dollars in Saudi Arabia and OPEC say to the US, thanks for the memories, baby, and nations around the world start dumping the dollar during this interest rate spikey hike, guess how the markets will react? Stocks, bonds, real estate at the same time blow up, they collapse. That's the four pillars of wealth, ain't it? Stocks, bonds, real estate, and the dollar. And when all of these collapse as interest rates spike and the dollar is globally being dumped, returning to the US shores, thus concocting the US and Davos' very own World Economic Forum Great Reset. This is how fragile the system truly is. And this is why it's better to have precious metals. It's not to get rich, it's to preserve your efforts from severe inflation. It's because we're on the cusp of what I believe is a monetary doctrine shift. Most of the businesses on the Belt and Road Initiative will be using the new digital yuan. You might ask, what is the digital yuan? It's the beta test of the Chinese central bank digital currency, a CBDC if you will. Just the other day, there was an article that came out by Sergei Glacier. He's a Russian minister in charge of integration and macroeconomics for the Eurasian Economic Union. He came out and he laid the fundamental principles by which the new US post-dollar economic system will be based on. And he goes on and says, and I quote, "It will not be based upon any particular currency as with the Bretton Woods order, but rather a market basket of local currencies tied more deeply to an array of real commodities such as gold, other precious metals, grain, hydrocarbons, sugar, etc." So think about the digital Chinese yuan, right? What better way to roll out the distributed ledger technology, a DLT, where you can show the world the veracity of everything that all of these countries have pegged to. Why does the European Union not work in theory? Well, because there's nothing it's pegged to. Each country is moving in different directions.
You will not be able to claim asylum here. You will not be able to access the modern slavery system, and you will not be able to make...
But how about all of these non-Western countries coalescing, not only against the universal dislike of Western hegemony, so much so that we saw that relationships being mended between Iraq and Iran, where they're building a railway between Iraq and Saudi Arabia now. Without the US, we're seeing connections being built between countries who have hated each other for years. It's that old age adage of my enemy's enemy is my friend. They're all coalescing against that central theme, but that's not going to be enough. A credible currency would need to be pegged to something credible. And no longer will it be mere trust, but verifiable credibility. What are all the countries that own all these commodities? The BRICS, right? And all the countries that are asking to join the BRICS own a lot of the world's commodities. So what better way to roll out the DLT, the distributed ledger technology, but to show its pegging to the commodities that is actually pledged to the new BRICS currency, which they just announced is coming out, as I discussed in my July 1st video. So why is gold tier 1 according to Basel III compliance, the World Bank, the IMF, Bank of International Settlements, New Development Bank, and all governments? Did they know that this was going to happen? Did they know that this could eventually happen?
It's also possible to have more than one large reserve currency. There have been times when that was the case. It's also possible to have more than one large reserve currency. There have been times when that was the case.
The inevitability and the mathematics of the dollars the miles is going to be the central premise to that old adage, and in return to the renewed world reserve gold standard. What better way to show the immutability and the veracity of this pegging, right? But on a distributed ledger, the Chinese digital yuan, the BRICS new currency, other countries' CBDCs, and Bitcoin will participate in what I believe will be on the rails of the BRICS payment system through the new BRICS gold-backed currency. And when that happens, God help us here in America, we better have our dollar backed by gold again, as it says in our constitutions, to remain competitive. The classification of gold's tier 1 status is huge. You know, just to touch on that for a moment, everyone in my industry in finance has always thought that if anything were to rise to the level of the dollar, it would have been, the SDRs, the special drawing rights from the IMF. Maybe now it makes a lot more sense why central banks and other big players are accumulating and taking possession of their physical gold because of its risk-less elevated tier 1 status. Since you're awesome and investing in yourself, here is an unofficial BRICS gold nugget for you. You ready? Ultimately, in my opinion, there's going to be a connection between gold and energy. Energy that is produced within the BRICS bloc and consumed within the BRICS bloc is far more likely, far more important, and far more interesting than any connection between various fiat currencies and gold. That's what most people seem to be focused on. I think that's fine, and perhaps potentially a mistake. I think the key is the relationship between gold and energy, in particular oil and the relative prices between the two, where if you rewrite the price of gold in barrels of oil rather than dollars, which could be easily done as a denominator, free markets will be doing the rest, and we've seen how fungible oil is. The states tried to cut Russian oil off since last year, but it's still flowing just fine, even though there's like 72 variables or something to measure the grade of oil, like its viscosity, sulfur levels, etc., right? But that didn't slow down anything for oil trades. So the gold energy relationship, I think, is far more interesting than any potential gold fiat relationship. But gold fiat is far better than the current fiat system that's perverting the world today. In my opinion, we are nearing a major turning point in the global monetary system. We are in global monetary history right now, one way or another, right? So the reason I say that is because we're at peak cheap energy and peak cheap oil. I think that's undeniable based on the geology aspect of energy on things. I can expand more on that on the energy efficiencies of dynamics and societal progression of civilization if some of you would like to learn more about that. But peak cheap energy is fundamentally incompatible with the current debt-backed monetary system in its current structure, mind you. So unless there's like a energy productivity miracle like nuclear fission around the corner, the existing monetary system is definitely going to change. It's going to change via action, or it's going to change via collapsing into something else. Going back to the interesting idea of gold energy dynamics for valuations, since BRICS' GDP and growth rate is quarterbacked by China and the Chinese yuan, what happens to oil if the yuan devalues? If we take a step back under the system where oil is only priced in dollars, if you devalue the yuan, right, then oil would go up in yuan. The supply demand 101 would tell you that if Chinese oil consumption, including manufacturing, were to go down as the price of oil goes up relative to the yuan, global oil demand would then go down since China is the world's biggest importer of oil, and therefore oil prices due to lack of demand would go down. So that's how it has always worked out up until around 2018. In 2018, the Shanghai oil contract was rolled out, with increasing amounts of yuan-denominated oil from Russia and elsewhere. If China wants to stimulate their economy, devaluing the yuan versus the dollar is no longer the only lever they have. Why would they want to devalue the yuan versus the dollar when increasing the yuan against oil would strengthen the yuan against oil, effectively stimulating their economy on a real basis? You make energy cheaper if you're using the yuan, and you're actually going to be stimulating your economy on a real basis, not just through inflation, which is what you do when you devalue the yuan versus the dollar. Now, the yuan-oil relationship in this whole process means that the dollar is no longer the reference point. In fact, the new reference point is gold. Many investors seem to be waiting for China to devalue the yuan versus the dollar to stimulate the Chinese economy. They're not considering that oil-yuan relationship, which is the thing that could be used to devalue oil versus the yuan. Devaluing oil when using yuan for purchases can be done by increasing gold to oil ratio in China, thus BRICS currency being backed by gold, which tells me the play here might not actually be to sell the yuan against the dollar. It might actually be here to buy gold rather than to sell yuan or to sell oil. So hopefully that unofficial gold BRICS nugget has shed some light on what my thought process is about the grand mechanism of things. It's not definitive, but that's what I think. It's important to understand that the world has changed, and if Saudi Arabia does get accepted into the BRICS come this August, and they continue to no longer accept only the US dollar, but continue to accept the yuan and other currencies around the world, the shift has already happened. You might have heard the news that India may back out of supporting the BRICS currency that was rumored about just last week. My thoughts about India backing out is that it depends. It's too early to tell if India is really backing out or if it's another case of, Russia is collapsing into civil war because of mutiny. I do find it interesting that the US lost track of $6 billion donated to Ukraine right before the Russian mutiny. Or maybe India is thinking again about Putin's health and that he may pass away due to cancer within a few months. But we've heard this kind of story since the beginning of last year. Or maybe India is cringing over the adoption of the yuan and is just sour about its international usage. Point is, it could be for any number of reasons. I just don't know, and I don't think anybody really knows. The US dollar treasurer, Janet Yellen, was just asked about the BRICS currency. She didn't say it's not happening and it'll never happen when she was asked about it.
Next question goes to Andrea Schall from Reuters.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The Russian government has announced that it will launch a BRICS currency in August, and I wonder if you had a chance to speak with the Chinese about that effort. You've spoken here and in other venues about not wanting to see any countries being forced to choose sides. This particular move would create essentially a parallel currency to the U.S. as the world's reserve currency. Can you come up in your conversation?
So on the currency issue, I just want to reiterate what I've said in the past, which is I think the United States can rest assured that the dollar is going to play the dominant role in international transactions, facilitating international transactions, and serving as a reserve currency in the years ahead. I don't see that role being threatened by any development, including the one that you've mentioned. I've said previously and would reiterate that because of the role of the dollar and its ability to enable us to implement sanctions, there certainly is motivation in countries around the world to find an alternative. But all the data of which I'm aware shows that the dollar is overwhelmingly close to 90% used in international transactions. And I don't think that there is an alternative that could possibly displace that for the foreseeable future.
To me, the fact that she didn't come right out and say it's not happening, it's not going to happen, it's not going to work, I took that as a sign that she knows something is coming and that she doesn't want to look foolish in a few weeks when it does come out, having just said it's not going to be coming out in less than one full news cycle, so she saved her face. Maybe it's a faux pas on her part in the way she answered it, and in also other media appearances that she had as well.
The fact that the use of the dollar has diminished and gone down against competing currencies over the years?
There's been some increase in holdings of other reserve assets, but that's something to be expected in a growing world economy where there is a desire to diversify, but
so we should expect less use of the dollar, is what you're saying. We should be anticipate.
We should expect over time gradually increased share of other assets in reserve holdings of countries. It's a natural desire to diversify.
She cited basically the BRICS currency project in question is a normal development and diversification of our times. So I think it's a sign that they know something is coming. There's a lot of fog during currency wars, and these days are just the beginning, since these are really big issues. It's no longer just oil and dollars, and because of that, because now oil is available in other currencies, including the yuan, that changes the arithmetics in many important ways.
It's also possible to have more than one large reserve currency. There have been times when that was the case. It's also possible to have more than one large reserve currency. There have been times when that was the case.
Thank you again for your continued support of the Financial Almanac, and I'll see you guys in this next video.